Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Eric Betts, and I'm Content Manager here at Fluke Reliability. We still have some people logging in here, so I'll just give a minute for everyone to get settled, and then we'll get underway. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, How Clean is Your Maintenance Data? On data integrity and why it matters. Today's webinar is being presented by Lee McClish from NTT at GDC Americas. And before I introduce our speaker, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping topics quick. Today's webinar is being recorded, so I'll be able to share a link with you all after the event is complete. And we welcome you to revisit the content, share it with your colleagues, etc. We also invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box there on your screen. If you think of a question for Lee at any point, you can just type it in there and I'll either pose it to him or hold it for the discussion at the end. Okay, as I mentioned, today's presenter is Lee McClish. Lee, we're really happy to have you join us today. Lee is the Manager of Maintenance and Reliability, as I said, at NTT GDC Americas, a global telecom company and data center company. He's also held a number of other impressive positions in his career, including at the graphics and packaging company, BASF, and he served in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer. He holds a long list of accreditations, BSME, MBA, CMRP, CRL, CPMM, and appropriately, Lee is also the author of a new book called Maintenance Leadership 101, which was published by Reliability Web recently. You can buy it right now on Amazon. Lee, with that, thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you for today's talk.
All right, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. This is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Eric already kind of covered all the stuff about me. I will say that my heart is with engineering, and my perspective is really as a practitioner. You know, the last 30 years in industry, you know, how have I used the data and how has it really made an effect on our operation? So I want to start this out with a poll question, just to kind of see where the audience is. So on a scale 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, what is the impact of data integrity on the reliability of equipment? So this is not like a company question. This is more of a question for your perception as an individual of how much the data can really affect equipment and all the different reliability practices, particularly since this is a Fluke reliability, webinar. So if you guys can answer that quickly, and we can see where everybody's at. So hopefully we're getting close to, getting the results. Okay, so it looks like looks like the highest is number 5, which is good, and it kind of tears on down. So I think so that's good. People really think it does affect reliability, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So how do you define what data integrity is? So I looked up on Wikipedia, see what their definition is, and it's the maintenance of, the assurance of data accuracy and consistency over its entire life cycle. And it is a critical aspect of design, implementation, and usage of any system that stores, processes, or retrieves data. So to me, some of the key words in there, that one, it's accurate. You have confidence in it, that you have good data, that it's secure, and all the cybersecurity stuff works, and people from the outside can't get in there and mess with it. And it's over the life cycle of the equipment, and it's consistent, across different types of equipment, that say it's you have diesel generators, you have pretty good consistent data across certain asset type. And so why is it important? Well, it's important to make decisions. It's a decision tool with this data. So it can be for asset management, all the different things you keep in your CMMS or EAM. It certainly affects your key performance indicators and metrics. If it's crap data, you're gonna have a going input and you're gonna have crap data coming out. So I would say the data we're talking about for this audience is in your CMMS, computer maintenance management system, or EAM, enterprise asset management system. It's probably for assets, your preventive maintenance plans and task list, work orders, spare parts is a big one. You may have contacts in your database, maybe contracts, maybe a vendor database, maybe a nameplate data for like gearboxes or electric motors, things like that. It can also be other databases in your company. There may be some stuff within purchasing that they may have, for the purchase orders and purchase requisitions. It could be lessons learned, root cause analysis, maybe management of change process. Could be with finance, with your depreciation asset list. It's important you have a good list, there. Maybe you have like a lessons learned or incident database. Things like that are also data that can be affected by how well you maintain it. So what is good data? To me, good data means you don't have a bunch of blanks. You don't have a lot of NAs, and you don't have misspellings, and that it's accurate. And you talk about poor data, basically be the opposite of it. There may be some equipment, maybe you do have an NA. I know there's some minor like material handling equipment. Maybe there's only a model number, and the manufacturer doesn't really have a serial number. There are certain things like that, and you just have to account for that and decide, are you going to leave a blank? Are you going to put NA in it, or some other way of noting that it's going to be blank, or that you just don't have that information. And the biggest part of it is it accurate. Are there numbers that are wrong, or letters, or things like that, that kind of impact it? And when you do searches and things, what you search for may not come up because something was spelled wrong. So what causes a poor data? Well, it could be a legacy thing. Maybe you had an old CMMS and you were transferring it to your new CMMS, and you're just missing a lot of data in the beginning. And hopefully when you did that, you took the opportunity to kind of bite the bullet and get people out there, spreadsheets or whatever, and collect whatever data's been missing, to make sure that it's complete. And hopefully as they transcribed it, the accuracy was maintained. It could be maybe you get a new machine, and then you got to input all that raw data from the get-go, and just hopefully that you have all the data that you need. A lot of care is taken to make sure that's accurate. It could be a lack of standards. Maybe you don't have a good naming convention or something to identify, how it should be set up. You probably have a thing like called an asset ID, and there should be, some rhyme or reason of the format of it. And you want to make sure that, that convention is being followed. It could be similar characters, like a capital O versus a 0. When somebody writes it down, they could look very much the same. Could be a 1 and maybe a small case L, that could get transcribed wrong. So those types of things can really give you some poor data. The impact, I'd say it's huge. It would affect all your reporting that you do, maybe some dashboards that you have if you're not getting the right information. Affects your mean time between failure. One common thing that I found, I don't know how common it is, but hopefully it's not common for you, is, I run a mean time between failure in my building, is the worst culprit. Meaning that people just don't drill down to the machine or the component level. They take the easy way out and just create the work order against the building. And so the building has the worst failure rate. Little things like that. Mean time between repair, could just be the clock in, clock out time. It doesn't include, the initial time when the maintenance gets the call. It doesn't include the setup time, when you're done with the machine and the operator's trying to get it up, refining that and defining that is really key to making sure you have good data for that. Your failure cause remedy codes, those are really important. I've had cases where there's a problem with a toilet being clogged and somebody picked an electrical failure cause or reason. And so you have to kind of look at that data and making sure people are making the correct entries. So that's certainly a big part of data integrity. Certainly affect your total cost of ownership. It's a good thing to track throughout the life of equipment, particularly like equipment. Maybe you have 20 of the same type of centrifugal pumps. And you can kind of tell what your bad actors are by tracking that. Well, if you go in and change seals or do a complete rebuild or some other maintenance that you're not really tracking, or you have parts that you're not keeping a score of, then you're not going to have accurate information for that, which is really important. It could affect your capital planning. Maybe you really can't identify good bad actors. You need to look at replacement. It could affect scheduling if you have some errors in your preventive maintenance program. It could cause you to order the wrong parts. Maybe the inventory setup for a motor, has the wrong information. Hopefully the horsepower is right. The frame number, maybe there's a number transposed or a wrong letter, things like that. And you order it, you get the wrong one, could create more downtime. So definitely an impact on the reliability of your equipment. So it all boils down to the impact of decision-making, and the better the data, then the better decisions that you can make. So the question is, who is responsible for data integrity in your organization? So I threw a few down here as possible candidates. You can just click one of them if you would, and we'll kind of see what the perception of folks. And I'm sure a lot of companies have different organizations, different setups. I happen to work for a data center company now, almost 5 years, and we don't really have a maintenance department. They have operations, and operations does the maintaining and operating, which is a little different than what I'm used to. Some people call it production. That's why I put operation production, but this would be a good telltale sign of responsibility, which is key. So give people a little bit of time here to click and provide an answer. So hopefully, I don't see the results popping up yet, but sure we're really close. Yeah, so I see maintenance is the highest by far, and that's good, because the more time I've been in this, who does the data really impact? And it really impacts all of us. When your boss calls you and says, hey, when was the last time we had to change these power modules out? And then, what are the dates? What was the cost? If you can't go get that information, then the system just really isn't working for you. And it's so important to have that type of information just right there. You go in and run a report, set some filters, get that type of data, and you just never know when it's going to come up on cue, or it could be the monthly report. So I'm a big believer that it really is the maintenance and or reliability program folks, or them together, as a team. Otherwise, if everybody's responsible, then basically nobody is, right? And to say that, well, it's whoever enters the data. Well, that could have some value to it, but you probably have operations people entering data, they're entering work request, or maybe you're having to enter work orders, maybe you have machine operators doing certain things, you may have a storeroom person, doing certain things, but then, they're part of usually the maintenance and reliability, or they could be part of supply chain. or purchasing. You may have some other department kind of related there, but I agree. It really belongs to maintenance and reliability. So IT, involvement. Now I'm working for a data center company. We're kind of robust with IT folks, and they are involved from the point of view is okay. We have what's called a BMS, a building management system, and that software and firmware, they need upgrades occasionally. And they have things for Microsoft, for their upgrades and things like that. You also have field changes for equipment. If it's for like a variable speed drive or a PLC, it may be something more controlled by your controls and monitoring group if you're big enough to have that, those folks on your team. And they definitely need to be involved in the cybersecurity aspect of it. It's becoming a bigger thing. Some companies being taken hostage, and they just can't get to their data and do things, until they pay a fee, if they so choose to. So there needs to be IT involvement, and that should be kind of something that's set up, with the parameters of their responsibilities and with the organizational chart. So let's talk about improving it. So, and how do you prioritize, what data? Some ideas I have and things that I've incorporated, particularly recently. I've had a lot of experience with SAP in previous companies. And there's a lot of platforms out there for CMMS, and more keep coming up, and some of them are add-ons and whatnot. And they all kind of have a role. But hopefully whatever software you have, you can make changes to it, without an act of Congress, like it is with SAP. SAP is very difficult to even add a field. And of course, it depends on the company and how much they control it. But hopefully you can maybe add drop downs or have a selectable table. So like one thing I noticed looking through our vendor database, one of our vendors is Schneider Electric. And some people, when they entered stuff, they entered Schneider, or they entered Schneider Electric, or they entered Schneider Electric Incorporated. So some of them had actually like 3 versions. So, we kind of did some research on what their official, title is and put it into a table. So people, when they go in and create assets, for the manufacturers, they can pick the correct, naming convention. That could be one. Mandatory fields is something that we started using for assets. People go in and enter assets, no manufacturer, no model number, no serial number. So we made all 3 of those mandatory, meaning that if you didn't put something in those fields, then they couldn't create an asset. And it kind of works, smart people figure out workarounds, right? So they might put in like NA or just put something in the field, just to allow to do it. And then that comes down to what I'll talk about later in some type of auditing process. But at least they have to look at it and know that they need it, and hopefully they'll do their due diligence and go out and get that information. It's important to know the character limits of the fields. How many characters can it hold? Is it alphanumeric? Is it only numbers? Is it dollars? Those types of things are really important. There may be some default values that you can put in and select. And for entering data that where a default value may be applicable, making sure that you set the right ones that you want are important. You may have some fields that just autofill as you go through. Maybe the creation date. It shows up, like most of the work orders do. But there may be some other ones that may be appropriate. One thing with people entering data, if the easier you make it for them, the more likely you are to get what the type of information integrity that you're looking for. So I really took a look at the position of the fields on the screen. So if someone goes in and creates work orders, does it flow right? Are you getting the asset information properly, describing the problem, entering the failure cause remedy data, and kind of doing the right flow. And then looking at all the fields. You may have some fields that are necessary. One thing when I came to my current company and I looked and there's like all these things that are more manufacturing related rather than being related to a data center. Because when we had the deployment that occurred before I got with the company, it was kind of a standard deployment. There was an IT guy in charge of it. There wasn't anybody with reliability maintenance involved in it, making sure we're getting all set up like we like. So there are quite a few fields that I ended up either hiding or just deleting and getting out of there just to remove the clutter. So that the fields you have on there have a purpose. And when you go on there and you see blanks and you start asking, well, why are these blanks here? And it makes it a lot easier doing that. Another thing that's really powerful, hopefully your CMS has the ability to export. I think most of them do. So you export usually a CSV file or an Excel file. And then you can use the filters in Excel and just go down and look for blanks. You can go down and look at vendor names and you just scroll down and see if there's duplicates or misspellings, those types of things. That's a really pretty powerful tool. Maybe you have like preset questions for work orders. It's something that actually I haven't done, but my team is really thinking strongly about doing. Is some technicians are just great. They'll create a volume and they have like, 10 sentences on the status of a work order, what they found, how they fixed it, which is really good information. And some may just say fixed. So we're thinking of some pre-scripted questions, like, what was the problem as seen? Do you think there's any parts that are needed? What have you found in any preliminary troubleshooting? Stuff like that. That can kind of leading questions. So at least the initial work order, has some good information there. Because that's, lots of times, as the maintenance people get this work order and it would be just very vague. And then they go to the machine and the operator isn't there because he's on break, or they moved him to another machine because they're down. And then they go find him to get the information. So having more of that up front is really key to reduce that MTTR and just save some labor that's kind of being wasted due to lack of right information. And then just a review of, say, work order data. Your planner's looking at it, your scheduler, maybe it's a supervisor, whatever your organization is. Is there good information here? Is the right part of the machine selected even? Does that make sense? Did they pick the right section of the machine when they created a work order? Those types of things. Is there enough information to say, okay, is it a millwright? Is it an electronic guy? Just an electrician, a general labor? Who are the type of people that I need to send out here to attack this problem? And then when it's maybe for other type of data like asset information that you're putting in, it's always good to have a second set of eyes on it. So I always make sure that I have the input given to my CMMS administrator, and she just kind of go down and look and make sure all the columns are filled in, the data looks right. That's really pretty helpful, before we put it in, and then we review it and, oh geez, we missed this, or these dates just don't make any sense. Or sometimes it got populated, it's got 1969 in there of some new equipment, because that was a default, in the software. Another thing you could do is hire a data analyst. Maybe it's a big enough company, maybe a big enough plant, maybe the impact on this data, maybe some of the data might be something that you end up sharing with customers. You need to make sure that it's accurate. So data analyst is an option, if you can afford it. The one thing I did a year ago, I hired an administrator. Before that, it was kind of myself and one of my coordinators were just kind of doing administration of it. And getting somebody that's maybe got experience with different platforms, whether it's eMaintenance or Maximo or Bigfoot or Limbo, there's all these different ones. So you get somebody who has a couple different platforms experience, then they bring a different perspective to the table and maybe some changes that they've seen work well, or different policy, workflows and things and other softwares is pretty helpful. Another thing that I've done is a couple of years ago, I started a monthly scorecard. Usually they're kind of driven by somebody in corporate, maybe like key drivers, like maintenance costs or different things. But I made one that was my own, and I looked at, okay, how do I want to drive behavior? So how many work orders do I have with 0 labor assigned? So I put that on my scorecard. I want managers to be able to see, oh, geez, for my particular plant or site, I got a problem. My people aren't entering their labor, as they should, to keep track of. Or it may be in one company, it was a bills of material in SAP. As you build those, they're a really great thing because you can just create, requisitions and things, directly out of there, saves a lot of time, but it takes a long time to build them. It took us a couple years. And so we kind of track the percentage of how many bills of material you got entered. And that would be on, one of our reports. So those types of things are good, but you got to have good data, to get the good output. Keeping, I guess, on top of the permissions in your CMMS. Who has access to change what? Who can go and delete data? That's something that should be a big deal, and there should be only a few select people that can do it. You may have the software we use has a mass change process, which is really powerful. Say you had 100 air handling units, and you need to make a change of something, whether it's in a work order, maybe an asset, some type of data, you just need to make a little change to it. So rather than going in 100 times and doing it, you can do this mass changes. But being powerful like it is, you don't want maybe all your technicians to have it, unless they've really been properly trained and it makes a lot of sense. You might want to control those and just make sure you have all the right permissions for all the user levels. That can also impact your data integrity. Hopefully your software has a track changes, feature in there where you can go in and look and see, oh, well, hey, they changed that work order here. These are all the people that touched it. These are the people that just made these asset information changes. Sometimes, there could unfortunately be an incident of some type, and you have to develop some type of a root cause analysis or lessons learned, being able to go and see who all touched it, may be critical. The other aspect of it is just say, hey, go ask that individual, why did you make that change? Or, what were you thinking, in so many words, not to put them on the spot, but to understand the change, and it may result in a process change that you need to look at, and how people are doing business or how people are allowed to do business, maybe some loopholes, that you hadn't thought about, but they found. So as you go through all this, in the data and making improvements, I am a strong believer that you have to audit it. You have to go in, somebody has to go and look at it. So I created a quarterly and an annual audit. So a quarterly audit is going in and looking at work orders, evaluating failure cause remedy codes, want to make sure you look at the reliability data, to see what type of information you're getting. Do your mean time between failure. I think quarterly is probably a good interval. One company I actually did a monthly. Just kind of depends on what you feel and the staff you have, how much time folks can put towards that type of analysis. But if you don't ever go in and look at it, and people don't know that you're looking at it, then you're just really not going to get the results that you're hoping to get. And on an annual basis, I'm thinking maybe that's quarterly's a lot to look at the overall system. On an annual basis, probably go and look at vendor names and assets that got added, because they're probably getting added throughout the year. And how many blanks do I have, for a manufacturer or the model number, those types of things. Where are the gaps, that they need to get filled? And then the other thing is some type of feedback loop. Can the folks out in the field, provide input? And hey, I noticed that this model number was missing. Hey, I went to go order this motor, and I saw that the frame was wrong or something like that. One thing with inventory, normally you have cycle counts, right? So it could be internally driven. It could be maybe supply chain required, counting every day, whatnot. But as the cycle counts are done and you're going out looking at it, that's another good feedback, loop to make sure that the information, is accurate. So there's a lot of ideas I had, and how to improve data. Part of it, I think, also is the written processes. Some people read them, some people don't. You can create all kinds of them. Nobody looks at it. It doesn't really do you much good. But the beauty of whether it's a process, maybe it's your work order life cycle workflow. Who touches it when, where does it go? How does it get closed? All that kind of thing. It could be a procedure, a step-by-step, like, hey, we're going to add a new asset. This is who does it. This is the timing of when it happens throughout the project. To make sure you have it in there so you can create PM plans. So out of the gate, you can start your monthly PM plans, when you start running that piece of equipment. It's all been commissioned and whatnot. That could be the policy, the higher level, kind of a thing. Whichever one makes the most sense, or maybe you have all three. It just depends on what works the best for you. But whatever that is, it needs to kind of say who's responsible, who does what when, have timelines, expectations, all that kind of stuff, built into it. I'd recommend someone there, talk about, say, field changes. As you get, letters and service reports and things from the vendors, maybe from annual PMs. Hey, now we have this firmware update that we're recommending, or some type of field change. Who's going to run with that? Who's going to get that to begin with? Are you going to create a work order? How are you going to track it? How are you going to track completion of it to make sure it gets done? One thing I've done in our asset information, is I have a software firmware version number that we track. So when they say, oh, hey, we got this, firmware 1.0.3 alpha or whatever it is, you can go and look and see, hey, do I have any of those? And you search for it. Now, it takes a lot of work to put that in, and I wish I could say I had it in there for everything, but we have it in for a few, assets, and it's been pretty valuable. You can go in and look up that type of information. Written processes should include the type of software. Is it, as I mentioned before, is it for a PLC? Is it for a variable speed drive? Is it maybe for your building management software or something, relate that, maybe an energy management software, those types of things. So there may be a difference in your company between the IT responsibility and the OT responsibility, the operational technology. Maybe you're big enough where you have a controls and monitoring group, and they kind of track the PLCs and drives separate. All those should be kind of laid out in some type of a policy and probably procedures. Something about who's going to enter the data. Maybe include in there what the levels are. Maybe you have a technician level, maybe a supervisor or lead level, a manager level, your planners, schedulers, coordinators, administrator level. Maybe you have all that's kind of spelled out in there. Who has access to what. And so maybe about the workflow deficiencies. Somebody finds something. A process for a feedback form of some type, some mechanism. If you just have people send emails, everybody's busy, everybody gets a lot of emails, a lot of those will slip through the cracks. You hope that they don't, but they do. And you want to make sure that people know that you had that deficiency and you actually took action on it. If the next time that PM comes up and that technician's out there and they don't see any change to what they recommended, then they're probably less apt to provide that feedback, which is critical to come from the field. It also should include some type of a process for retiring assets as you replace them, or maybe you have a capital project, where you're doing kind of a rebuild on one section of the machine, or maybe the entire machine, whatever it is, maybe with conveyors, some type of material handling, capital projects. Should be something baked in there. Is it going to be the capital project manager, or whatever, or engineer, whatever the title's being used? They can provide that new information. Maybe buy a bunch of new forklifts to change them out. Or how are you going to get those into the system and get the old ones out? And how are you going to maintain that data? And how long are you going to maintain it? how long are you going to want to go in and be able to compare different makes and models, and see what the information is. Then another, some companies have some type of ISO certification. My company has gone into the ISO 27000, which is information and data security. There may be some things in there that your company could benefit for, or you can at least glean, what some of the standards are, for that may be able to help and kind of make all your data integrity with your IT folks a little bit more robust. Then every system has to have training. If you don't have some type of training, some type of revisiting issues and things, you're probably going to be probably not going to get the results you're looking for again. So I kind of recommend as a minimum, at least annual training for kind of all hands, everybody in the department, everybody who touches it. One thing that I found pretty effective is to, as you do your audits, is to take information from your audits and say, hey, this is a really good work description for a work order. To say this is good. Maybe, hey, we're seeing some trends here. We're seeing some new assets get entered that don't have serial numbers. And it's really important that we have those. We have a breakdown, we call the OEM or, maybe a third party, whoever, the serial number may be really important. There may be some type of an upgrade to it that may be different than other models of that kind. And there may be field changes made, and they may have the records to say, okay, this is the exact replica of that particular piece of equipment, motor, gearbox, whatever. You make sure that you order the right one. And maybe a spot trading. Maybe you do a quarterly audit, and it's like, oh, I'm seeing this trend here that, we're just having this plethora of failure cause remedy codes, maybe only one of them, that we really need kind of nip this now. And you just have spot training with that particular department, that group of technicians, maybe not, associate names, with negative things, but kind of once you kind of go over it and bring it out, people recognize, oh yeah, hey, I actually kind of did that and need to get better, hopefully. That's a good way to do it. New employees. So you get new employees, maybe they knew, your particular type of maintenance software before, but every company has their own little tweaks and own little fields that are a little bit different. So having some type of like a computer-based training, or maybe it's a one-on-one training, maybe every other week. The one thing we did was we have kind of a PowerPoint made up. We have like some CBTs that the manufacturer of the software provided. Say, here's the steps and how you enter a work order. Here's how you close it out. Those type of basic steps that they go through. So we can track, in our CMMS that they completed those. And then before then, we only give them access for viewing rights. And once they complete the training, then we can go in and get them full access as a technician, so then they go in and create work orders and do all the different things they need to do. So that's one way to kind of control it. So I think that's been a pretty good thing as far as training goes. So in conclusion, before I get to questions, data integrity. So it needs to be a team effort. It needs to be a culture within your company. People need to understand why it's important. Any meetings you have, it can be stressed, the importance of it, whether it's a daily meeting, scheduling meeting, production meeting, a weekly scheduling meeting. It could be a monthly, crew meeting or department meeting, whatever it is. That getting feedback to folks is really important. And the more emphasis you put on it, then the more they'll know that's important to you, and you'll probably get better results. And then I love that saying, that people do what you inspect and not what you expect. And so I actually looked it up. I really didn't know, but it's credited to some guy called Lawrence Apley. And I guess he was the president of the American Management Association, which is a really good organization. And he was a president for 20 years from 1948 to 1968. And I guess he made this statement in 1967. So that was interesting. Maybe remember that if you don't remember anything else of what I said. But it's really a good, it really is kind of brass tacks, because if you never go and look at this stuff, people are entering in the errors, then you'll see it and you'll be impacted by it. So that was my presentation. I really appreciate your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a few thoughts and things I found along my journey, and hopefully pick out a couple of nuggets for it. So we'll go and move on to the questions portion.
That was great, Lee. Thanks so much. Before we go into questions, I'll just have a reminder to everybody, today's webinar was recorded and it'll be posted online. We'll also send out a link to everyone who attended. We do have a couple questions that have been submitted. If you have a question still you haven't put in yet, you can enter it in the Q&A chat box there, and we'll get through as many questions as our time allows. Lee, the first question we have here is, are there other types of data, it says, i.e. preventative or predictive maintenance activities that would be affected by data integrity?
Yeah, I think it all starts with the foundation. It really starts with the asset data. Unfortunately, in a couple plants, we have all of our assets listed, and after about 2 years life of the building, somebody said, hey, what about those air conditioning units over there? And they weren't set up as an asset. And so we didn't have a PM, set up for it. So it could be something, like that. So it's not just a serial number, it's not just, a frame number of a motor. It's really all the data that you have and all the fields that you determine, that are needed, for all your stuff in your CMMS.
All right. And the next question we have here is, how do we change the culture in our plant so that data integrity is important?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity in the last, 5 years or so to go to quite a few conferences like SMRP. Actually, one with a couple with fluke reliability and some other ones, reliable plant. And I don't think there's probably too many maintenance reliability professionals out there that don't talk about culture. And it comes up in every one of those. You're like, how do I change the culture? And I haven't been in about 3 or 4 different companies. And, in my company that I'm, some of it gets set by corporate, and they kind of drive it down. Some of it gets set by plant management. Hopefully it's the people on the ground there doing the work. It's their culture is what really matters. I can stand up on a pedestal and make all kinds of policy procedures, like I said before, and nobody reads them, then it really does no good. But what I found is, as the more involved that I got in managing my department, if I had a PM going on, I was out there as much as I could, to talk to the operators and technicians. Hey, how's this going? One thing I did is we would, actually use hard copy work orders. I know there's a big trend, kind of going away from that. But we would have the, technicians cross the little boxes. They did this. They'd write comments on it. Operators could write stuff on it. And then I would, that would go to our planner. He would process it, and then he would give them to me as a maintenance manager. And I would actually look at them all, and I would make sure that we address them all. And sometimes there's some really good feedback, and I would make sure I go out to that individual. So that is what people know, that you care. And as they see you and you're more visible, and you're out there and you're making the changes, you're listening to them. I mean, you don't obviously do everything that they ask you to do, but if there's something you don't do, you make sure you explain to them why. And then maybe there's more to it. Then maybe it's a dialogue more, and there may be some other aspect to it that you didn't really think about and didn't consider. And then, maybe it affects you on another change for improvement. I think it's that full circle, and it really boils down to who's responsible and kind of driving, that culture. And hopefully it's a collective group. Could even affect like your gain sharing or profit sharing, those types of things, and all the reports and dashboards that come up. All that kind of feeds into it.
Great. We have a couple questions here about leadership, as you might expect. And I'm just going to try to lump two of these here together in the interest of time. But the first one says, looking at the stuff, I think this is an unresolved issue, seen as the corporate level doesn't mind data integrity issues. We're in the cycle of despair, highlighting it again and again. Are there any foolproof solutions currently? And then the next one is, how do I convince leadership that data integrity is important enough to add something like an admin or give us the time to actually fix our issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the manufacturing companies I've been in, it's usually been kind of driven more from the top down. Usually there's like a corporate, like CMMS administrator, and he may have some guys, they go around all the plants and they do audits, or they have self audits done. In one company, we had to do like this monthly audit, a quarterly audit, and an annual audit, and then we had to provide all that information, and it would get lumped into a scorecard, and you have all the plants, listed and their levels, and then all the like the plant managers would look at it, and it would kind of drive some behavior because those types of things were in our MBOs, our management business objectives, and we get scored on it, it could end up affecting your bonus and your merit increases. So 5 years ago, when I joined this data center industry, which I didn't really have any background in, and I thought it was more IT stuff, but they had a lot of equipment, a lot of electrical distribution, a lot of diesel generators, a lot of UPSs, batteries, cooling towers, a lot of HVAC equipment. And it's kind of a new industry, right? About 20 years old, and there's like no reliability, right? So whatever the OEM said, we did. So we would have like 5-year contracts, and oh yeah, Cummins says we should do a quarterly, a semi-annual, an annual, and we would just sign this like $5 million, dollar contract for 5 years, and kind of give them a blank check, and and what I would tell folks as I had meetings is like, well, who does everything that's in the back of your Ford 150, truck manual? Everything on there at every single interval. And I know there are people that do that, and I'm sure they're in pristine order, but I'd say the majority of the population doesn't really do that. And some of it may not completely run to fail, but you may wait, a little bit longer and kind of extend those intervals out. When do I really need to flush my coolant system? Things like that. So it really is kind of the culture thing. And so I started, just meeting with the leadership. So you get a few people in your pocket. So I would go to the operations folks, locally where I was. I actually moved to Ashburn, Virginia, which is data center central. And I get the manager, a supervisor, and a director. And we'd sit in a room, we would talk about diesel generators. What is really necessary? And so one thing I learned in data centers is you actually looked at codes. The manufacturer, I didn't really go through, ANSI, NETA, MTS codes. Didn't really look that much at NFPA 50 Bravo. I did 50 Echo with Arc Flash. IEEE's got some codes, and some of our customers actually required that. So that sort of drove a little bit of that behavior is customer requirements, because it's a big deal. If you shut down, a bank's data, for any fraction of a second, it's a major big deal. Right, so some of it could be customer driven. That should be part of the focus. And then I created a roadmap, and I got buy-in, at least at the director level, kind of pushed down to manager level. Like, hey, this is what reliability is. These are all the different aspects of it: inventory management, work order processing, preventive maintenance, tasks, creating task lists, PM optimization, all these things. And a lot of it's introducing folks to it if they don't know. A lot of it helps just going to conferences and getting more information, like, oh, wow, General Electric is doing this with their program, or, Toyota, they're doing something a lot more, autonomous maintenance and different programs, and then trying to sell it up and trying to sell it down. It's a process. There is no foolproof, system. And a lot of it comes into personalities, like if a manager just has certain things in their goals, and by golly, that's what we're going to focus on, that's probably what you're going to focus on. And it hopefully doesn't come to where you have some major breakdown, you end up having a machine break, you have to spend $100,000 to fix it, to get somebody's attention. But sometimes that I won't say works to your advantage, but it does get people's attention. And then maybe you start looking at all that. But hopefully you're kind of looking at cost data and how much you're spending. And because preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, usually kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's like, do I really need to spend this much doing this? But if you have the data, that'll support it by mean time between failure cause remedy codes, mean time repair. And you don't have a lot of fluff in it. The other thing I kind of struggle with some in my current company is, as I look at all these codes, and you look at like ANSI NIDA, well, they make their money for testing. It's like, oh, you need to test this, 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 and this. And so I was really looking at, a lot of electrical distribution. We have switch gears, switch boards, a lot of transformers, bus bars, all those things. Well, if you went and did all those things that, people recommend, I don't know how you'd stay in business. So I would get experts involved. So I went out to not just one expert. I looked at Schneider Electric, looked at Vertiv. They own high voltage maintenance and ERS, energy recovery services, and they're in charge of the guys that will go out in a substation and do the maintenance. And so you get like a service manager, say, hey, here's my list. I call them scopes of service. So I went in, these are the things I should do quarterly, annual, maybe every 5 years, whatever it is, and get them to look at it and say, they'll say, well, geez, no, nobody really does that. There's really no bang for the buck. Yeah, you can do that if you want, but out in the field, we really just don't see those types of issues. So it really kind of helped me pare down, the requirements that I was creating. Since now I'm more at the corporate, level, we have 13 different data centers and still growing. And that's what I want to do. Coming from the field, be in charge of mechanics, electricians, you don't want be a corporate guy that just, kind of dictates all these things. You got to get that feedback. And that's all part of the cycle, as I was saying. So it's really a journey and it's a process. So I hope I answered that question.
I think you did. I think that was a great answer to both of those. The next one is a bit more specific, though. Is there a way to have a template work order ready for the maintenance teams for recurring tasks in the plant?
Well, there is, and hopefully your CMMS, we happen to use e-maintenance. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but I never had any background, but it's a platform my company chose. And I think Fluke Reliability, and they do a really good job because they're kind of connected. So in that, like I think a lot of other softwares do, we have task lists. So like I take an air handling unit and I have a quarterly PM for it. I may have 10, 12 different tasks. They're very specific. And I try to make them as specific as possible because we have a lot of different manufacturers. So for this particular building, whatever that manufacturer is, I have a very specific task list for it. And you can set up, when the work order generates, it takes this task list and puts it in there as part of the work order. And then hopefully there's a mobile platform that they can even go out and bring it up on their pad, and it'll show, and they can mark X's on the boxes saying they completed things, or you give them a hard copy. So I would investigate whether or not your software has that type of thing, or if you're in the throes of maybe looking at changing, find one that does, because that's a really great way of getting a copy of that for the feedback, because maybe you missed something. Maybe it's something that really is NA, or there's a field change done to that part of the machine and that doesn't apply anymore. The less NAs that technician has, the better. If he has like 5 or 6 things are NA, he's like kind of gets disgusted, with it, and might not give you the feedback that you're looking for. So that's one thing that works well for us, is the task list being a part of the work order, and including the vendor steps. If we have an annual PM, like on our UPSs for vendors, we have theirs that show up, and then we hand that to them so they can look at it and give us feedback. And as they go through and look at field changes or whatever in our HMI, they can provide comments of things that we should update or consider updating.
Great. The next one is there a word or acronym you use that helps provide a structure for good data to provide when producing a work order request? So it sounds like they're looking for like a data integrity slogan, or like, some kind of acronym that I help people remember that we need good data?
Well, that's a really good idea. I don't know. That's a good question. I would, maybe have a contest in your department. Have somebody come up with a cool word and stick it on there. One thing I always heard is bluff, right, for emails. Bottom line up front. Maybe a lot of you folks have heard that. And that way you put bluff, you put like 1 or 2 sentences, and people see that. And, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I need to, do I really need to read the whole email? It could be similar sort of philosophy, I guess. You could, maybe add it in somewhere on a work order in a field. Yeah, I like that idea. I haven't done it.
That's a good one. And the next one is similarly kind of specific. Have you seen PM used for administrative purposes, such as contract renewals and coordinating inspections in order to see how they fall into maintenance schedules?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the company I'm in now, we don't have a separate EHS task tracker system like my previous companies have had. So in my CMMS, we got just oodles of safety environmental stuff. So like even like the SPCC plans, they have to be reviewed every 5 years. So I have a PM set up in there with just, update SPCC plan, get, professional engineer to sign off on our words of that effect. It's in there as a 5-year thing. We have it in there for like stormwater plans. Going in and doing your monthly eye wash inspections, things like that. Even I kind of let the sites come up with certain things that will help them. So I have one site that says, hey, go change the clocks to daylight savings time. And I really don't have a problem with that. As long as they're using the system and are getting a benefit, to me, that's what it's there for. I don't need to dictate, oh, no, you can't, have a PM set up for something like that. As long as it works, that's great. So a lot of EHS related things. There's maybe like an air permit Title V, requirement, something like that, or some, for diesel generators, we have to provide like a fuel usage to the EPA, those types of things. So I think that's great to use the system for it because then somebody's going to be looking at it, and hopefully those won't fall through the cracks.
Great. I think we have time for just one last question here, and this one is going from the specific to the broad again here. If we only have so much time to put into data integrity, what data should we prioritize first?
Yeah, well, you have to look at the assets. And I think at a minimum, you have to have the basic information in there. And I would certainly focus on, the PMs and the task lists and things that are used every day and work orders. That's what I would focus on. I mean, it's nice to have all the vendor names spelled right. What reports is it going to? Maybe somebody in purchasing needs to fix that for you. If somebody in finance, they want all this information for depreciation, they need to help you out, and you just need to focus on what really impacts your key drivers, the things that helps your department and the maintenance reliability of your plant get better. That's kind of how I would approach it.
Great. And I think with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Lee, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise here. It was really insightful. There will be a brief survey that's going to pop up here at the end. If you'd all be so kind as to take the time to respond, it really does help us improve these webinars. And speaking of, you can find information at excelix.com on our upcoming webinars. Our next one is July 20th, I believe here. So if you have any additional questions, would like to connect directly with the Fluke Reliability team, you can reach out to Lee here at the contact information he's kindly provided on the screen, or you can find Fluke Reliability at our website or on LinkedIn, etc. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye.
Take care.